Presidential elections. This page shows you a useful map of the process of presidential elections, from primaries and caucuses to national conventions to the general election to the Electoral College. You can pause the video if you'd like and study the map in more detail to give you a better idea of what's going to follow. Article 2 of the Constitution sets forth the basic requirements for being becoming president of the United States. In order to serve as president, a person must be 1. A natural-born citizen of the United States. The consensus of early 21st century constitutional and legal scholars and relevant case law is that natural-born citizens include, subject to exceptions, those born in the United States and those born elsewhere who meet the legal requirements for birthright citizenship. Second, a person must be at least 35 years old and a resident of the United States for a period of no less than 14 years. A candidate can start running the campaign early, before turning 35 years old or completing 14 years of residency, but must meet the age and residency requirements by Inauguration Day. Presidential elections occur once every 4 years, with registered voters casting their ballots on Election Day, which since 1845 has been the first Tuesday after November 1. On Election Day, voters decide which candidate slate of electors will cast ballots in the Electoral College. Electors meet in their respective state capitals on the Monday following the second Wednesday of December, the first Monday after December 12, to cast their electoral votes. Candidates need a majority, 270 electoral votes or more, of the 538 total electoral votes to win. Congress then certifies the results in early January, and the presidential term begins on Inauguration Day, which since the passage of the 20th Amendment has been set at January 20. The presidential election is an amalgamation of separate state elections rather than a single national election run by the federal government. Candidates must submit separate filings in each of the 50 states to qualify in each state's ballot, and the requirements for filing vary by state. The nomination process, consisting of the primary elections and caucuses and the nominating conventions, was not specified in the Constitution, but was developed over time by the states and political parties. Primary elections are generally held between January and June before the general election in November, while the nominating conventions are held in the summer. Iowa and New Hampshire traditionally hold the first presidential state caucus and primary, respectively. Citizens in each state vote in their party's primary election to choose delegates to the National Convention, where the nominee is officially chosen. The Electoral College and its procedure are established in the U.S. Constitution. Under Article 2, Clause 2, each state casts as many electoral votes as the total number of its senators and representatives in Congress. In 1961, the ratification of the 23rd Amendment granted electors to the District of Columbia in an amount equal to the number of electors allocated to the least populous state. U.S. territories are not allocated electors and therefore are not represented in the Electoral College. Under Clause 2, the manner for choosing electors is determined by each state legislature, not directly by the federal government. In the early years of the Republic, many state legislatures selected their electors, but now all use the popular vote to choose electors. Electors generally cast their electoral votes for the candidate who won the plurality in their state. Those who vote in opposition to the plurality are known as faithless or unpledged electors. Faithless electors have never decided an election, and more than 99% of electors in U.S. history have voted as they pledged to do. As recently as 2016, 7 electors broke with their state on the presidential ballot, and 6 did so on the vice presidential ballot. In 2020, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the Constitution does not require that people elected to serve in the Electoral College be free to vote as they choose. The court held that states have the constitutional power to force electors to vote according to their state's popular vote. While the ruling says states can prevent faithless electors, it does not require that they do so. At the time of the court's decision, 32 states had passed laws that bind electors, while 18 states had laws on the books giving electors the freedom to vote independently. Most of the time, the winner of a U.S. presidential election also wins the national popular vote. In 5 presidential elections, 1824, 1876, 1888, 2000, and 2016, the winner of the electoral vote lost the popular vote outright. If no candidate receives an absolute majority of the votes for president, the House of Representatives elects the president. If no one receives an absolute majority of the votes for vice president, then the Senate elects the vice president. In the 1824 presidential election, Andrew Jackson won the popular vote, but no one received a majority of electoral votes. According to the 12th Amendment, the House must choose the president out of the top 3 people in the election. Henry Clay had come in 4th, so he threw his support to John Quincy Adams, who then won. The Federal Election Campaign Act of 1971 was enacted to increase disclosure of contributions for federal campaigns. In 1974, the act was amended to create the Federal Election Commission, FEC, and to place legal limits on campaign contributions and expenditures. The law requires that candidates to a federal office must file a statement of candidacy with the Federal Election Commission before they can receive contributions aggregating in excess of $5,000 or make expenditures aggregating in excess of $5,000. In addition to limiting the size of contributions to candidates and political parties, the FEC also requires campaigns and political committees to report the names, addresses, and occupations of donors of more than $200. Here you see the contribution limits for 2021 and 2022. You can see that an individual donor was allowed to give $2,900 per election to a candidate committee, $5,000 to a PAC, $10,000 to a state, district, or local party combined, $36,500 to the National Party Committee, and so on. The first president, George Washington, was elected as an independent. Since the election of John Adams in 1796, all winners of U.S. presidential elections have represented one of 2 major parties. Third parties have taken second place only twice, in 1860 and 1912. The last time a third or independent candidate achieved significant success, although still finishing in 3rd place, was Ross Perot in 1992, and the last time a third-party candidate received any electoral votes other than from faithless electors was George Wallace in 1968. The next few slides are going to show you recent presidential elections, presidential elections going back 30 years, and I want to point out some interesting features of the different elections. So this one is from 1992. It shows a 3-way presidential race between Bill Clinton, the Democrat, George H.W. Bush, the Republican, and Ross Perot, the Independent. Clinton was from Arkansas, Bush was from Texas, and Perot was also from Texas. Notice Clinton won a fairly comfortable over 2-to-1 margin in the electoral vote. He won 370 electoral votes to 168 for George H.W. Bush, less than half of the votes that Clinton got. Perot got 0 electoral votes, meaning he carried 0 states. Clinton also won the most states. He got 32 states plus the District of Columbia, whereas Bush only won 18 states. And Clinton had a hefty margin, a clear victory in the popular vote. He got 5 million more votes than Bush did. And Perot in third place got 19.7 million votes, almost 20 million votes. And the percentage in the Electoral College, or the percentage difference in popular vote, again, was in Clinton's favor with 43%. And notice Perot got almost 19% of the popular vote, which again was a very high margin for a third-party candidate. Now, looking at this, some people have argued for years over who Perot took votes from. Did Perot take votes that would otherwise have gone to Bush, meaning Bush would have won without Perot's candidacy? Or did Perot take votes from Clinton, or perhaps from both in equal measure? We don't really know. In 1996, you had Clinton running for re-election against Bob Dole, who was the Republican candidate, and again Ross Perot, who now represented the Reform Party. Notice that Perot did much worse this time. He still got 0 states and 0 electoral votes, but he only got 8 million popular votes, over 10 million fewer than he had gotten the previous cycle, and he got 8.4% of the popular vote. Notice that Clinton also won by a larger margin in the Electoral College and in the popular vote. In the Electoral College, he had 379 votes, and in the popular vote, he had over 8 million more votes than Dole, who came in second place. And in terms of the percentage, 49.2% means Clinton won over 8%, about 8.5% more of the popular vote than Dole did. So Clinton won re-election with a wider margin than he had won the previous election in 1992, even though he still didn't get 50% of the popular vote. The 2000 United States presidential election was between George W. Bush and Al Gore. Here, Bush won a very, very narrow decision. He had 271 electoral votes, and Gore had 266. Bush won 30 states compared to 20 plus D.C. for Gore, but notice Bush won fewer popular votes than Gore did. Gore had 48.4% of the popular votes, and Bush only got 47.9%. This was an extremely controversial election, and the contest came down to the 25 electoral votes in Florida. These votes were up for grabs and contested in the federal courts all the way to the United States Supreme Court, which finally decided the case in Bush's favor, and Bush ended up winning the election. In 2004, George W. Bush defeated John Kerry. Here you can see another close race, but Bush wins more comfortably than he did over Al Gore in 2000. Here Bush wins by 35 Electoral College votes, 286 to 251. He gets one more state than he won last time, 31 states. And he has this time he does win the popular vote. He gets 62 million votes to 59 million for Kerry. So Bush had about 2.4% more of the popular vote than Kerry did. In 2008, Barack Obama defeated John McCain. Obama won with 365 electoral votes to 173 for McCain, and he won by almost 10 million more votes in the popular vote. He had 52.9% of the popular vote to 45.7% for McCain. Notice that on the Republican side, a woman, Sarah Palin, was the vice presidential nominee. This would be the first time that the Republicans nominated a woman for vice president. In 2012, Obama won re-election against Mitt Romney. Here, Obama, interestingly, did worse than he did in 2008. In other words, this election was closer than the one where Obama defeated McCain. Here, Obama won 332 electoral votes to 206 for Romney. He only won 2 states more than Romney did, 26 states for Obama plus D.C., to 24 for Romney. And Obama won about 5 million more of the popular vote than Romney did, 51.1% to 47.2%. That's a narrower margin than you saw in 2008, where Obama defeated McCain. This was only the second time in American history that I know of that a president won re-election in a narrower contest than in the first election. The other time that happened was in 1936 when FDR won re-election by a closer margin than he had won in 1932. The 2016 United States presidential election was between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. This election was one of the biggest upsets, if not the biggest upset, in presidential election history. Up until the morning of the election, Hillary Clinton was heavily favored to win, but Trump ended up winning. He carried 30 states to 20 for Clinton, and he won 304 electoral votes to 227 for Clinton. Again, though, like in the 2000 election, the Republican won fewer popular votes than the Democrat did. Here he won 62.9 million to Clinton's 65.8 million, so she won almost 3 million more votes than he did, and yet Trump was the winner in the Electoral College. Another interesting thing about this, if you look at the map on the right and you look at the states and how they voted, you can see there were some faithless electors here in Texas, for example. Texas had 38 votes, and Texans voted to allot those votes all to Donald Trump. But one person voted for Ron Paul instead, and another person voted for the Ohio governor, Kasich, instead of voting for Trump. You also notice an interesting thing. There were some states that went red, in other words, that voted for the Republican, that had not voted for a Republican in many years. So, for example, Pennsylvania voted for Donald Trump, the Republican. Michigan voted for Donald Trump, and Wisconsin voted for Donald Trump. All states that historically had not voted for a Republican in many years. The 2020 U.S. presidential election was the most recent one, and here Donald Trump failed to win his re-election. He was defeated by Joe Biden, who got 306 Electoral College votes to only 232 for Trump. Notice this election was evenly divided in the states. 25 states voted for Biden and 25 for Trump, but Biden won a hefty margin in the popular vote, almost 7 million more popular votes than Trump did, 81.2 million to 74.2 million. Also, notice that some of those states that Trump had won in 2016 now went back into the Democratic column and voted for Biden, reverting to form, you might say. So Pennsylvania with 20 electoral votes and Michigan with 16 electoral votes, and Wisconsin with 10 electoral votes, all voted for the Democrat, whereas they had voted for the Republican in 2016. And those switches changed the outcome in this election. One concept I want to point out to you is this idea of a red wall. These are states which have voted for the Republican presidential candidate every year for many years. You can see states that have voted for the Republican since 2000, like Louisiana, Arkansas, Tennessee, Missouri, West Virginia, and Kentucky. And you can see some states that have voted since 1986 or 1980 or 1996. Texas, for example, has voted for the Republican presidential candidate every 4 years since 1980. There are also a few states that have been voting Republican since 1968. Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, North and South Dakota, Colorado, Idaho, and Utah have been voting for the Republicans for over 50 years, without exception. Alaska as well, since 1968, has voted solidly Republican. There's also a blue wall. These are states that always or almost always vote for the Democrats. So here you see the states that have voted for the Democratic presidential candidate in every year since 1992 except 2016. Remember, that was the year that a few states broke from the tradition, broke from the pattern, and voted for Donald Trump instead of Hillary Clinton. These are those states that voted for Trump in 2016 that otherwise have voted for Democrats in the last 30 years. Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Some of these states, notice, are consistently Democrat and have never wavered. For example, on the West Coast, California, Oregon, and Washington have voted Democrat every presidential election since 1992. On the East Coast, New York, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, these states have voted for Democrats every year since 1992.